Wonderful. Thank you to all of our roundtable guests. I can see that there's been a lot of fantastic discussion and a lot of buzz going on Slido, which is fantastic. So thank you to all of our guests and each of our roundtable esteemed guests and panelists as well. I'd just like to say a very quick welcome back to our online guests. You're about to join our closing plenary, so thank you very much for coming back. Thank you as well to our facilitators, who you're doing a great job, and you've done a great job, but your work is not done. We're going to ask you to share with us, if you can, the key points and recommendations from your roundtable discussions. So there will also be questions provided by our roundtable, by our online audiences as well. And to all our online guests and in person in the room, please do continue to interact with us via Slido and pose questions to our panelists as well. We have a lot to cover, so I will dive right in. Can we invite Sui Wei to kick off our discussion and share the fantastic insights from your roundtable, please?
Hi, all. Sorry, I have to call in from Cambodia. So on my roundtable, I have Mr. Tan Suhan from Chief of Sustainability, Ms. Yvonne So from Singapore Green Building Council, Mr. Adam Wade from Next Wave Partners, and Veronica Chambuko from Ceres. So it was an interesting conversation we have because we have a lot of different diverse kind of views. But from some of the summary and highlights I would like to share from our table is the conversation was more centered on moving towards net zero buildings. That's the topic that we have. But when we talk about net zero buildings, we think that it shouldn't be just on buildings. You should look at it as net zero that serves the community and then the city. So you have to look at it in different countries, in different kind of scale. So I would like to share, because I think I shared mainly based on my experience here in Cambodia and trying to seek a little bit of advice from the experts that we have at the table, sharing my difficulties in challenges in Cambodia and in developing countries like Vietnam and Thailand. While we recognize in, like what Prof. Lam shared, one of the important things is trying to be designing sustainably from the start. So like recognizing the design stage that we should design, like trying to pick up from vernacular architecture rather than just doing modern buildings right from the start. So how can we reduce energy consumption at the first stage before we go into like using technology to improve it? And we also talked about how the private sector and the public sector could work more in synergy to try to create an ecosystem that could encourage the move towards net zero buildings. This is in relation to how in Cambodia we're trying to have, the government is trying to set up a green building council. So that collaboration, like as highlighted by our table, is quite important into getting people more aware and more active in this way. The other things we talk about also the immediate solutions and recommendation. One of the hope that the table has was actually trying to make high tech more regular tech in a way, so that the smart solutions can be more accessible, not only to the developed countries, but also accessible to developing countries as well. And we talk that seems to be one of the key issues that we have in developing countries. Sorry, just looking at the notes. So I think where we come up, I think one of the things that we picked up is, I think as the whole world kind of moved towards net zero building, we have to kind of be aware that a lot of this result that we are at this stage is a result of developments from a lot of different countries up to now. But it's only now itself where it's a bit more sensitive. So where the developments in emerging countries, emerging markets are being put on, has a lot more scrutiny in it. So the whole society as a whole rather than just at country-wide. There should be a lot more partnership with different countries such as Singapore to be able to help the developing countries to learn better and actually utilize the technology or the know-how in order to build better. I think those are the few key points that we have from our table. Back to you, Anna.
Thank you, Sui-Wei. Thank you, Sui-Wei, for your insights there. Kevin, would you like to add for the Buildings Roundtable in the room?
Hi, yes, happy to share. My name is Kevin Su from the Center for Livable Cities. We're very glad to be here in support of this event. We had a very dynamic conversation from a group of folks, including many private companies, and how they thought about this issue, as well as government. And I think the key for us was we need to look at the whole value chain. Certainly there's some enlightened leaders who are able to ask their companies to push these ethical practices that go beyond what is required. But we cannot only rely on this. It's inspirational, but I think as the group pointed out, people are humans, and that means they're driven also by things like fear and desire. So incentives certainly can help, but we also need requirements and penalties, they expressed. And the regulatory environment overall affects what people end up deciding to do. And so if we think about that, and we kind of look at it all the way from upstream, where we're talking about site and site selection, to buildings and the supply chain used to construct those buildings, and then the role of the consumers, kind of in each of these, I think there is a role for both encouragement as well as regulation, seem to be the sense of the group. And if we start thinking about sites, there was discussion about brownfield sites versus greenfield sites, kind of how does the development tax work? One interesting idea was right now we have this conversation about green replacement, but instead of only just looking at whether you're putting green back, really thinking about carbon sinks that are existing on a site and making sure that if you take a sink away, then you need to kind of replace it with a carbon sink of equivalent function. There's also thinking about how do we have better accounting frameworks for sustainability. There was a feeling that right now it's a pretty simple and one-dimensional assessment for a site, but can we have a more comprehensive framework that accounts for ecological value, urban heat island impacts, social value, heritage value? Can we account for all of those to guide actions about whether we end up developing that site or not? There were some data limitations that people observed, so in particular, site conditions and values may change over time. So even just a few years from now, even if a site was intended for a certain purpose, if the conditions change or if people's values change, we'll need to make sure we re-examine and refresh kind of what we use sites for. That point about carbon replacement and kind of keeping high carbon value things also impacts preserving what's there, kind of that concept, right? Because if you cut down a forest, even if you replace it with other green, it just might not be equivalent. Thinking through as well, can we reposition buildings? Can we, instead of demolishing and building something new, because then you'd be incurring a very large embodied carbon debt. So that was another topic we talked about, which was embodied carbon and the supply chain. There was a feeling that we do need better methods for understanding the supply chains, and right now, embodied carbon may only be 20% of the building's full life cycle, whereas 80% is still operational energy. But as we start moving toward more super low energy buildings, the embodied carbon will become a bigger part of the building's total impact. So that life cycle analysis is very important, so we truly understand what our impact is going to be. And one point to make is that if we really care about this 2030 goal in this next decade, when you build a new building, that incurs a large carbon debt, which can only be paid off over time. Whereas keeping that existing building but retrofitting it is going to allow us to kind of stave off kind of the new carbon that would be incurred. So there's some thought about making existing buildings more efficient and even changing their function. That was one point that was made, which was that, so as we move into this new normal and how we shop or how we work could be quite different. We should not make assumptions that the future of development needs to look like past development. So even purposes of, say, a shopping mall might need to change. If we talk about this value chain as well, it does really require collective effort from all parties. So starting from the very top, political will coming from politicians needs to change, all the way down to the purchasers, right? So from the politicians down to the purchasers and the tenants. And the group seemed to feel that KPIs, if net zero really is the goal, or some kind of climate neutrality really is the goal, KPIs must be set for everyone. Someone had the cheeky but perhaps effective idea that a politician's bonus, if it's tied to GDP, well, what if it were tied to greenhouse gas emission reductions instead? Same for a CEO. If they set a target or KPI for their staff, that will translate down for the whole company. And then finally, consumers. At the end of this value chain, how do we really incentivize and drive demand, right? There are a lot of calculations we can make as companies to think about how we build greener, but if it's not demanded yet, at least not strongly demanded yet by the consumer, is that something we can do to change the equation? And there was a suggestion, for example, that perhaps green buildings, people who end up buying green buildings could benefit from some kind of stamp duty relief, or maybe a green loan or green mortgage would be available to them. And there were also things about, we certainly see positive signs, right, in the commercial sector where multinationals and commercial tenants do demand green buildings, but we're just not seeing it yet in the residential consumers. And so are there new models for costing energy to bring those costs up front so people really can see right away why a green building would save you money in the long run? And I think also this related to the idea of risk, which is that green building can also be a more secure investment, because not only is it more comfortable to reside in, but then over time it's still going to continue to be a high-performing building even as new regulations roll in, whereas an inefficient building is both uncomfortable and also maybe subject to regulations as the whole world is moving toward climate neutrality. So I think the bottom line is, if we really care about this issue, we really need to affect the whole supply chain, starting from the whole value chain, starting from the sites and the buildings we create down to the consumers.
Thank you, Kevin, for very valuable insights there. I'd like to now hand over to Shrikant to talk about the mobility aspect of today's roundtables.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the members of the roundtable for such an engaging discussion. So we started off asking ourselves, what would be the route to net zero in mobility? We all agreed that mobility is multidimensional, multimodal. Each type of mobility has its own challenge. When it comes to shipping, there is a particular nature of challenge. When it comes to land transport, the challenge is different. So there was no easy answer in understanding how mobility would move towards net zero. But there were certain principles that came out in our discussion. The first was that net zero would definitely come from traveling less. So how would we travel less? That is linked to the way that we are going to design our cities, or maybe redesign our cities. The pandemic has taught us that we could do a lot more things by traveling less, and that lesson could sort of reside with us and help us redefine the way that we are going to live in the future. And with that principle, if we come one step down, we understand that net zero in mobility is going to be a long-term game. It means that the government, the regulators would have to play a lead role in creating the path forward. In Singapore, we have the Singapore Green Plan 2030, but there are more things that needs to be added to the Green Plan 2030. The panel felt that the Green Plan is a very bold declaration of aims that Singapore wants to achieve, but the way to get there doesn't seem to be that easy. There are a lot of hurdles and challenges along the way. And if we could categorize those hurdles and challenges, maybe one common way of saying it is that there has to be a wholesome approach towards how we deal with mobility in urban space. For instance, if we redesign urban living, that people move most of their daily movements within 5 kilometers of their living, then most of the mobility in that aspect could move to active and fine mobility. And then we could redesign the road spaces to meet those new mobility demands. We came across conflicts in the society in the past 2 years when electrical scooters invaded the space of pedestrians. We always had the challenge of when cyclists and motorists shared road space, but now this is going to be a reality. We got to make a way that we redesign transport assets in a way that various types of transport modes can share them. We need to maybe introduce safety features that will help these different users to use these mobility options in a safe and confident manner. So this was maybe it's a bit philosophical in nature, but the way we thought that how mobility could move towards net zero. We did also discuss, what are the investment opportunities around this. So we could see in this cycle there is definitely a need to redesign our urban landscape. So there are opportunities around that. When it comes to EV, there are a lot of developments currently happening in the EV, especially around the batteries. There's a lot of effort currently being made to bring down EV from being a luxury product or a semi-luxury product for more mass adoptions. So there are investment opportunities around that. The infrastructure that is required for EV will be tremendous. Even with reduced travel, even with multimodal options being available for citizens. If we have to change consumer behavior to adopt EV, then people need to be charging EV as easily they would go to a petrol station and fill fuel. So for that, there has to be sufficient number of charging. So this creation of charging infrastructure is a great opportunity for investments. Mobility as a service, when we think about this multimodal mobility options that could come about as part of net zero movement within the mobility space. Mobility as a service becomes very important. So this is where we could bring in tech, we could bring in customer expectations together and create new solutions for achieving net zero. So this is a great investment opportunity. We also talked about how car ownerships have changed. How you would move towards having more ownership experience rather than owning an assets. So how would we have the BMW experience or the Mercedes experience without really owning that assets? Those kind of shared options again are opportunities for investments. There is a great investment opportunity again on recycling and the second life creation in all of transport assets, but mostly around the batteries that would come with EV options. So these were maybe certain summaries that a very vibrant discussion came along. I hope I was able to maybe bring all those points that was captured around in the discussions, but if anything was missed, happy to clarify it along the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I'd like to now hand over to our next speaker, Jonathan, to give us some insights on the big data, AI, Internet of Things, and the cloud, please.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Jonathan. I'm the MD of Hindered, an IoT company, and in my table we have a mix of participants from AWS and Center for Livable City, LS Livable City. One of the things that we say is key is education, all right, mindset. What do I mean by that? I mean, just now one of the panel speakers was saying that even big countries, they commit to a lot of net zero emission and so forth, but they don't really know exactly what to do in the next 5 years. What is a concrete plan? So we think that the way I see is that many of us, actually, we have this big idea of green, we have this big idea of net zero, but precisely what needs to be done, we don't really know. Not many of us know. I see Professor is nodding his head. So he's a pro, and yet he sees it. I'm in the field of digital, and 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we start talking about the word digitalization was then new. IoT, people asking me, what is IoT? What is AI? And what is it Kekiang or what? So people don't really know what, that was 5 years back. And we need to educate, and it takes time, right? And today, I think most of us know the necessity and the importance of digitalization because we see impact. At that time, 5 years ago, it's just a broad idea. So I think it's green and net zero is the same thing now. All right, we have a broad idea what needs to be done, all right, but we don't really have a clear vision, clear action, and these are the things that we can do within the organization, within a company, or within the country. And that's, I think, very important, and I think we are still at infant stage. And all across, from government leaders to corporate leaders to students and men in the street, we need to understand and see the importance and not just pay lip service to it, all right? And that means a very big mindset change and education, right? The problem is, what we're talking, somebody mentioned, along the way, people feel that this is a rich man problem. Only the rich country can do it. A big country can do it, or a big company with budget can do it. While it is sort of factually true, it is very sadly true, because it should not be, all right? The planet is only one. The rich man, the poor man stay in the same planet. We live together, we die together. And we all have a part to play, but the thing is we don't really know that yet, and we just see, oh, somebody else will take care of it. Oh, COVID, okay, we need to take care. Oh, I need to put bread on the table, somebody else will take care of it. So we need to address this. Even as we speak in COP26 now, world leaders gathered, and yet you see some people making joke that, hey, but yet why is people all flying on, why are all the world leaders flying on private jet with big cars and emitting even far more carbon in that conference itself? And the panel prof was saying, hey, well, we are here, and yet did we optimize the aircon in this room? How about the lighting in this room? Is it really optimized? I'm not sure. The thing is, we need to really have it into our lives, and that's very important. So if I ask all of us here in our respective companies, what is the tangible thing that your company is doing? Or what is the tangible thing your family is doing? I don't think a lot of us can give a very clear answer. All right, for ourselves, we are in digital. We realized a year ago that it's important to go into it. We pledge ourselves, we put some stuff in there, but we struggle with what are the concrete, precise action to take, right? So that's one thing. So I think it's important that the industry need to be educated so that clear targets, clear processes, clear solutions, clear action plans need to permeate to the entire ecosystem and the industry. So that's important, so that it's not just lip service, it's not just program, but it's actual plan. Of course, the other thing is, it's also important to have a dollar figure pegged to it. Okay, why I say that is, in profit and loss, when you do it, it's a clear number, $1 and cent, profit and loss. So everything can, the processes and the activity all get towards it. It's very clear. But green, net zero, is very intangible. You don't really, you can't hold it properly. And because you can't hold it properly, what do you mean by net carbon? How do you reduce carbon? It's not something you can see a dollar figure. There's no greenbacks on the table. So action plan become very vague, and as a result, it become very loose. So it is important to define this, and also to lay at the end of it what is also a dollar figure as well. So, put an example. I mean, in we doing the digital, we realized that we're doing IoT. Yeah? I realized that initially when we so far deployed 1 million over sensors around the world. Initially, all the sensors that we do and project we do is for the purpose of compliance to certain requirement or for a certain cost-benefit analysis. It's the dollar. Objective is dollar signs. But when we look back now, actually every single thing we do, or most of it we do, have a green, sustainable, net carbon agenda in there as well, without we knowing it. So for example, we did a project in Japan deploying 1 million over gas meter. It was simply for the purpose of cutting costs, because instead of human, you use meters. But we realized that it actually reduced carbon footprint by a lot, because instead of getting people going around traveling in their vans to collect data, you actually use tiny little sensors that can last 10 years on a single battery life. And that, to us, is a great carbon emission reduction. We did a project in Australia putting trackers on beer cats. All right, Australia love to drink beers. All right, so there are hundreds of thousands of beer cats. So we put a sensor on it to detect where it go to, and what stage of the supply chain is in. And by doing that, we realized it cut down the loss of beer cat by 10%. And on top of that, in the past, for every beer cat that's happily serving beers to a happy drinker, there are 4 beer cats idling somewhere, maybe in a backyard, in a warehouse, sitting, waiting for replenishment. But by putting a sensor on it with IoT data and with analytics and optimization software, we cut down from 4 idling to 3 idles, beer cats. And that is a tremendous saving in terms of transportation, in terms of raw materials of the cats as well. So there's also a green element. So we realized that, hey, actually what we're doing in the past, we thought is to save money, optimize, but it actually helps in green. And on top of that, we realized in the pandemic, it also helped in the pandemic because it reduced human interaction, unnecessary interaction. So it is so important. So and on top of that, we also see that by having cloud, all right, in the past, a lot of SMEs would run a little servers on their own in the storerooms, and then they have all the servers in there. But right now, more and more companies moving to cloud. And when you move to cloud platform, it can be optimized by a large-scale company, whether it's Google, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's AWS, and it runs it, and it's a lot more optimized. Right? I know data center use a lot of energy, but by pulling together, by economy of scale, the net carbon emission should be far lower than having it scattered all around with a lot of wastage. And that, to us, is also a big thing, and these are all ready and available for all of us. So what we see is that it is important to see how the tech world can contribute. We heard about green tech, we heard about fintech, we heard about medtech, and so forth. But green tech is still very, very new. All right. So, but the thing is, the industry need to move to it. I know that the BCA, the IMDA is now working on a solution book, all right, for net carbon ESG, and they're starting with the built environment, right, for green buildings. So that's something is coming up soon. So by the time we talk about education, it's coming on board. I'm mostly part of the committee in Agri-tech, which is the association for a lot of the thousands of tech industry. This year, we just started a sustainability subcommittee, and we'll be organizing. We realize that education is something very lacking, and we'll be organizing a lot more programs to get the industry to work together.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yep. That is for sharing it with such passion, and I get the sense that you could share some more, and we'll have some questions shortly afterwards. I just wanted to now pass over to Achyut to talk to us about the Food and Agri-tech roundtable and what you learned from the insights there.
Fantastic. Achyut Iyengar, I'm a food scientist by background, but I've worked in the animal nutrition and health industry for the last 15 years, and I work for DSM, health, nutrition, and bioscience company. I had a fascinating panel. It consisted of a plant-based innovator, a cultivated meat startup, the largest online marketplace for food and agriculture in China, and then of course a person from the NGO space who kept us all honest. However, we were able to come to a consensus on 3 key messages. The first one was we all agreed that addressing climate change and transitioning to a low-carbon future is key for a healthy people, healthy planet, and we must do this soon. Yeah? And we said there is going to be, whether it is going to be around addressing malnutrition or addressing food loss and waste, we need to do that now. Secondly, we all agreed that science is key. Science-based action, as one of my panelists termed it, we got to use science to drive innovative solutions to deliver sustainable, scalable solutions, such as fortification in terms of fighting malnutrition, or around making the alternative proteins more affordable. We also talked about, we see growth opportunities in the supply chain. From farm to fork, there are a lot of inefficiencies that we need to first target. So the key is to make sure that we look at the existing industry and remove the inefficiencies in the system, while also thinking about the Horizon 2s and the Horizon 3s. All of these have to be done together. And the last point was around, there's a place for everyone. Whether you're innovating in the animal space, you're innovating in the plant space, alternative protein space, there is a need to provide accessible, affordable, and producing them with the highest standards to meet the needs of a diverse population that we will have by 2030. Whether it is reducing food loss and waste through innovative molecules, or whether it is through the supply chain, whether it is fostering innovation in a startup, in the cultivated meat space, or whether it is improving efficiencies to provide more, to get more, from whatever is available on Earth. That we all agreed on. So thank you for the great conversation, but all in all, we are very positive about the future, although we do acknowledge that there's a lot of work to be done. Thank you.
Thank you for providing some much-needed optimism and for being so candid as well. And last but not least, I would like to turn to Nini for our resources and circular economy insights, please.
Thank you, Anna, and being the last one, so a lot of things have been covered. But first, I want to thank my fellow member in the group of resource and circular economy. It was really fascinating discussion, and we have a quite diverse background. We have representative from plastic industry, from building, from fashion, and myself. I'm Nini Purwajati. I'm from Resilient Cities Network. So it was really interesting. If I can summarize, I guess one of the things, the highlight was that it's not so much about technology, but we need to recognize the complexity to implement towards this resource efficiency and also circular economy. In our table, we discuss ranging from societal expectation, how we incentivize, how about standard so that we can make informed decision to government role. So using the examples, a couple of discussion that we had, for example, on the throwaway culture, it's not just on fashion, but also we need to reflect on the buildings, like using the example of here in Singapore, it's quite short life cycle, so we need to think more about how we need to do more repurposing of buildings, and then we discuss, for example, about societal expectation, that we need to improve the quality of life, we need to meet the growth of the population, but also at the moment, unfortunately, actually taking down building versus repurposing might, I think we moved to the right trajectory, but there are more taken down the building and then build the new one. On the complexity, we discuss about, of course, like the actors, value chain, and then the need of, for example, data tracking. But then there's a lot of openness and necessary, and that might not be as easy, like openness from many different corporations and actors involved in one supply chain. We discuss about the need of collaboration. It's crucial, but often overlooked, and then there's a limited incentive for that. We discuss about, I think in the plenary, there's keywords on the speed, the urgency, and then one of the example that we had in our table, how in Singapore, government role play really crucial role in speeding up regarding plastic packaging with both regulatory framework, but also providing certain facilities so that the startups in this space moving really fast. So as enabler, that's really important. We also touch, so that's more from the Singapore context, but we also need to recognize, so especially me coming from Cities Network, there's question of capacity, budget and technical, both budget and technical capacity in the context of cities from developing context. And we also need to talk about, I guess, equality and justice. Like there's a need to improve life condition. In the plenary mentioned that this was from high carbon growth, but all these cities still grappling with very basic needs. There's a need to fight corruption and innovation. Sometimes it's hard in this context because need to guard this accountability situation. So we haven't really touched much on this space, but I think we agree that Singapore needs to play a leadership role in showing best practices in this space, in how Singapore creating enabling environment for circular economy. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Nini. That's really fantastic to hear from you. And also, I think there's a theme running through here, which is, of course, we need to educate people, but we also need the public and the private sectors to come together and really start to invest where investment is needed, and that also heavily involves technology. I just want to quickly ask, as our first question from, in terms of the pandemic, and I know that unfortunately it's such a big thing that we often talk about, this question is for Jonathan, but how do you think the pandemic has hindered the net zero transition?
Yeah, I alluded a little bit to that. The thing is, when a pandemic comes, what will be the first and foremost in your mind is to stop the disease, is to make sure you got your job, how you got things going on. So as a result, and companies then struggling with how then do they continue their operations and such. Unfortunately, then net zero become a secondary agenda because a higher priority comes about. So the last 2 years, I think there might be a slowdown in that. But I think from a Singapore standpoint, I'm very heartened that even in spite of the pandemic, I think last year Singapore launched the Green Plan for 2030. And we see the various ministers and the young leaders and the 4G coming up to talk about the Green Plan and many of the government projects for sustainability, food waste, recycling, carry on. So I think that's, so from a government standpoint, yes, it's good, but from an enterprise standpoint, I think there's a bit slowing down, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the opportunities of collaboration between the private and the public sector, Sri Wei, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, I think with my experience from public and private sectors and now working in where we are now here, we are working quite closely with the government. But maybe I would like to share this comic that I have in my mind coming to this forum. There was this comic that I saw by Datuk Lat, the famous Malaysian cartoonist. It shows a group of people in their suits and all, protesting in an area where a forest is being cleared. And then this group took a plane back to their home country, had a meeting in a boardroom that's air-conditioned, with window looking out to the beautiful cities. And you can see a lot of big buildings, big factories, but not many trees. So this kind of comic is sticking in my mind. In some sense, the irony is still true today, while today's situation is a result of many years of development by different countries. But the recent development in the emerging markets, they are really more in scrutiny than ever. So I think one of the key things that we kind of observe is one of the most effective, I think even in the roundtable, the most effective action is a collaboration, rather either a collaboration between different countries, collaboration between public and private, and how we can then come together. So I see this collaboration as hands like on a pinwheel, if you may. So the collaborative effort is kind of in one area could enable progress in the other, that it helps to kind of put a positive step towards encouraging the others and spinning this pinwheel. So I feel there's a lot of collaborative efforts that is possible between the different countries, from developed countries to the developing countries, where the developing countries could actually learn from the good design and planning. We've sort of like a crystal ball looking into the future, learning from perhaps Singapore, whether it's public or private, and other successful cities, and avoiding what didn't work and improving from what did. So I think to me, this pinwheel kind of reminds me that it takes all parts of society working together, whether it's private, public, the community, to meet this biggest challenge that we have facing our generation. So the more hands we have pushing this pinwheel, the faster our effort is in amplifying.
Thank you, Sue-Wei. I think we got the gist there. It seems that it's cut, unfortunately, but that was really great. And I definitely love the idea that you can...
The different countries, the public, private, yeah.
Thank you. And I love the idea that emerging economies, by learning from developed economies, can leapfrog and not necessarily go across a linear model when following these trends to net zero. The final question is for all of our panelists, and I'll start with Nini, and I'll work the way down the stage. In just 5 words, in light of COP26 this week, what is the most effective industry action that can be taken to accelerate the transition to net zero cities? In just 5 words. I know that's difficult, but let's see if we can try.
That's challenging. Oops, 2 words already. 5 words. I guess a lot of collaboration and innovation already being done. We need to share more so that many will believe that it's proven, so that local government will trust and then can operationalize and can implement because it's proven. Sorry, it's more than 5 words.
Thank you, Nini. And Shrikant.
Maybe I would say regulations with long-term objectives in mind.
Wonderful. Kevin.
Set ambitious goals, ask for accountability, and innovate to make the business case.
Great. Thank you very much. Jonathan.
Deep conviction of the heart and urgency.
Sustainable food systems driven by science and innovation.
Thank you. And last but not least, to our virtual guest. Sue-Wei?
Collaboration, accessible technology, trust, and pinwheel.
It's been a really wonderful discussion, and I think that we could clearly talk about this a lot more. The points that you shared have been very, very thought-provoking, and I think what's been wonderful is that there's clearly a need, as I mentioned, for education and investment. So I'd like to quickly invite us all just to take a group photo. I think we can do it without masks. Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up from the team. So if we just stand towards the front of the stage and meter apart, then we can take a no masks photo. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers. That was wonderful. Okay, and now we have our special keynote from Mr. Kong. Over to you. Go ahead.
So it's a great pleasure for me to speak at this event and tune in to all the subject matter expert today. My name is Kong Wing Fok, director a member group Cambodia. So Canopy Science Development is a company in Master that is currently Sustainable Township View Cambodia. But today I'm not talk science or now. I'm here to exchange world, hopefully share to build sustainable emissions. As a professional for the last 26 years from Singapore to China, Philippines, and now Cambodia. So building cities, we have one thing. They are very true. The urban population used to grow, and at the same time, people aspire for quality of life. So the question always, how do I build a city support everyone if there with minimum impact on the environment and also can last for generations to come. So I remember when I first arrived in Cambodia about 2 years ago. I was struck by the similarity of Cambodia to Suzhou about 18 years ago, where I worked on the Suzhou Industrial Park. So there's more flexibility in terms of planning. There are more leeway, so that we can take into consideration of resources to be used, and the impact consumption is not clearly defined. So that's why it's a great opportunity to set the right foundation. Cities are very focused about climate action today. So they account for 70% of worldwide emission that will grow in size as urbanization reach about 68% by 2050. So I will challenge you and face. It's about reversing the damage that we've done, but in carbon intensive emerging markets. The chance of face building the right type of urban environment. A city was consumed as high amount of energy as the industrial activities. So how do you build energy efficient cities? The most direct way is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That means we need to lower the amount of energy that be consumed by the new urban population. So Canopy is building a mini city in Sustainably. With Dream City, we hope to influence the country development so that you follow a sustainable development path. We will bring our diversified know-how of urban planning into practice in Cambodia. Building this new city is like planting seeds that have yet to grow into trees that we can rest under the shade and call it a day when we tired. But don't forget, they must grow first. So economic growth will always take precedence in a less developed country. The biggest roadblock for countries like Cambodia, and you will heard about such discussion in Glasgow, is how they need to strike a balance between achieving economic prosperity while catching up with the global agenda set by countries like reaching the net zero emissions. That cannot be one size fits all policy. So when it comes to net zero or decarbonization, climate change is long-term obligation. But for less developed country, they are hungry households that need a job and food. So a unified deadline to reach net zero emission is an unrealistic pace of change for less developed countries like Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia. And that doesn't mean that we can't take any measures to reduce the emission and meet the staggered deadline. So achieving net zero emission will be a collective effort. And I'm calling on people living in developed nations to increase clean energy and other forms of sustainability investment towards less developed countries to help ease the transition towards decarbonization. For us as master developer, we will do our part by focusing on what we do best, urban planning. For example, when we design a model city for Cambodia, we have worked with international partners and sustainability experts to avoid practical solutions that could produce more emissions. Cambodia is a different landscape compared to Singapore or China, so we cannot just model the model and apply it there. So consideration will be made when the urban population increases and start to increase in density. The heat will increase, the traffic will become a lot more congested, and it will cancel all the effort that we put towards creating a carbon neutral living environment. But at least we must prepare. Developers like us, we can bring in the best practice beyond financial sustainability and contribute to a sustainable green future. So Canopy Sense and other real estate development companies can try to incorporate renewable energy, green technology, have a good traffic planning systems, and encourage walking and taking bicycle and public space. They have urban presence. These are some of the low-hanging fruits that we, as developers, town planners, can carry out to reduce carbon emissions. Since the city of tomorrow. We are here. People have asked me, are there really opportunity for green development, real estate space in less developed country like Cambodia? I always tell them remember two things. First, it's a land of opportunity. Much like Suzhou when I was there, as the kingdom economics keeps growing, foreign investment continue to be coming in. So I don't look at Cambodia today, but look what will be in 10 years' time. So second, observe how the government has continuously pursued a progressive green development agenda. So green policy and initiative by the local government enable developers to take on sustainability plans in a way that we have not possible before. So in fact, the Ministry of Environment of the Kingdom recently started discussing the first of what would be their guidelines for green buildings and come up with a certification scheme in Cambodia. So all these are positive indicators that the country is moving towards a sustainable development path. Ultimately, decarbonization is a gradual process, and that might be disappointing to hear right now with COP26, as many young people have been protesting rightly that we need to hurry up. It's a gradual process because it requires an integrated approach. We cannot just be talking about achieving net zero and just annoy the interests of policymakers, business owners, home buyers, and other group of people. Net zero is a collective effort that will require all citizens of the earth to rally together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lekong, for giving us those insights and highlighting the importance of collaboration between developed and developing countries, as well as the positive indicators we are seeing in developing Asia. It now brings us to the close of this event. I want to thank Anna and also all our closing plenary speakers for all those perspectives as well. We know that we need to get to net zero, but $1 trillion question is, how do we get there? Today's insights from our speakers and facilitators have gathered that collective action from all parties, political will, to us as consumers and citizens is needed. We need a mindset, educational, and an entire ecosystem change in order to get there. And while this might be a huge task, this is absolutely necessary. With our sights on COP26, I hope we will see a good result. COP26 is watched for the global signals, but the work comes after that. And this is where we all have a part to play. We will be distilling this in key messages in our media coverage, as well as a summary on the insights generated as well. On that note, I'd like to thank again our strategic partners, Canopy Sense and City Developments Limited, our supporting partners, Arcadis and DSM, as well as the knowledge partners, Center for Livable Cities and Resilient Cities Network. Thank you to all our partners, speakers, and guests for joining us today. We've now come to the end of our forum. And for those online, please do spend some time to give us your feedback. For our in-person guests, we will be serving cocktails and canapes for the networking segments. In line with COVID-19 restrictions, please remain in your allocated tables for this. Please share widely about our event with our hashtags Cities Possibilities, Net Zero Cities, EB Conversations, and COP26. Enjoy the networking drinks, and I'll see you at next year's Cities Possibilities.